There was one prayer Earl Caldwell had stopped saying out loud. It was the prayer for his son. The one he had lifted from the supper table in the farmhouse on the red dirt road outside Cullman, Alabama, for 9 long years. Ruth would reach across the worn oilcloth and find his hand, and the two of them would hold that one name up toward heaven. But somewhere in the 9th year, Earl had started skipping the name. He still bowed his head. He still said grace over the cornbread and the beans. He just went quiet where the boy's name used to live. And underneath it sat a fear he would never have confessed in the fellowship hall on a Wednesday night. That a prayer prayed so long it has gone cold is a prayer God has stopped hearing. Most folks believe that, friend, that the prayers which count are the ones with fire in them, the ones with tears, and that the dry ones, the worn and repeated and half-automatic ones, simply fall back onto the supper table, no further along than the day before. But there is a letter near the back of your Bible, written to people standing in exactly that place. Believers whose faith had once been on fire and had cooled down to maintenance, worn out, quietly and privately thinking about giving the whole thing up and walking away. We call it the Book of Hebrews. And the strange and wonderful thing about it is that it never once tells those people to feel more. It tells them to look at what is actually, permanently true, whether they feel it that morning or not. So here is the question Earl was living, without ever putting words to it, the very question this letter was written to answer. Does God still hear the prayer that has gone cold? Or is a tired man on a red dirt road in Alabama just talking to a door that closed a long time ago? The answer is hiding inside one small detail almost everybody reads right past. Long before Earl Caldwell ever skipped his son's name, there was a prophet who prayed a prayer far worse than a tired one. He prayed to die. His name was Elijah, and he did not pray it from weakness of faith. He prayed it at the very summit of his life. He had just stood alone on Mount Carmel against 450 prophets of Baal and called down the fire of God in front of the whole nation. It was the greatest day of his ministry. And then a queen sent word that she would have his head by morning, and something in the great prophet simply gave way. He walked a full day into the wilderness, and he sat down under a juniper tree, and he asked the Lord to end it. It is enough. Maybe you have prayed something close to that, friend, even if you would never use those words out loud. I cannot keep doing this. I do not have the strength to carry it anymore. I am no better than anybody else who finally quit. And here is the thing worth sitting still with. When the strongest man of faith in his whole generation lay down under that tree and asked to die, God did not rebuke him. God did not say, a real believer would not talk this way. God did not hand him a lecture on having more faith. He sent food. An angel touched the exhausted prophet, woke him, and told him to eat. And when Elijah ate and lay back down, the angel came a second time, and what the angel said is one of the tenderest lines in all of Scripture. Because the journey is too great for thee. Heaven looked down at a worn-out man and did not say, the journey is easy, you are making too much of this. Heaven said, I know. The journey is too great for you. So first you will be fed. First you will rest. The direction comes later. And when the direction finally came, it did not come the way Elijah was braced for. It did not come in the great wind that tore the mountains apart. It did not come in the earthquake. It did not come in the fire. It came after all of that, in a sound the old King James calls a still small voice. The Hebrew underneath that phrase is gentler and stranger than our English quite lets on. Kol demama daka, a sound of a thin silence, a voice you could miss entirely if you were straining only to hear thunder. God answered the most exhausted prayer in the Old Testament, not with a spectacle, but with a whisper a tired man could finally hear. Ruth Caldwell would have understood that, though she had never read a word of Hebrew in her life. Because there came a Wednesday evening near the end of that 9th year when she walked into the bedroom and found Earl sitting on the edge of the quilt with his good shoes only half on, and she knew before he said a word that he was not going to service. There was no fight left in him for it. He looked up at her, and the thing he could not say to God he finally said to her. He said he did not know if it did any good anymore. Any of it. The praying, the going, the holding on. And Ruth, who had wanted to say that same sentence herself, more nights than she could count, did not preach to him. She did not quote a verse. She did the wiser thing. She went to the kitchen, and she put the kettle on, and the small whistle of it filled the quiet house, and she made him sit at the table and eat something before he decided anything at all. Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. She had never noticed before that she was doing exactly what the angel did. Sometimes the Lord sends his comfort wearing the face of the person sitting across the table from you. But food and rest were only the beginning, for Elijah and for the Caldwells both. The deeper answer, the one that holds when the kettle has gone cold again, is the one the writer of Hebrews builds with such patient care. He starts with the high priest. In the old way of things, no ordinary person could simply walk into the presence of God. There was a gap, and across that gap stood a priest, a man set apart to carry the people's needs into the holy place. And the trouble with every one of those priests was that he was just a man, with his own weakness, his own tired mornings, his own failures to carry in first. He stood between the people and God, but he was no stronger than the people he stood for. And then Hebrews says something that would have stopped a worn-out believer cold. The one who carries your prayers now is not a stranger to the weight of them. He knows hunger and exhaustion from the inside. He knows what it is to be misunderstood by the people closest to him, to be let down, to face a night with no easy way through. He was tempted, the writer says, in every way, just as we are. Not most ways, every way. Which means when Earl Caldwell sat at that supper table and could not make his mouth say his own son's name, he was not being watched by a God who was disappointed in him for being tired. He was being heard by a priest who knew, from the inside, exactly how heavy that silence was. And because of that, the writer says, here is what you do. Come boldly. The Greek word there is parousia, and it does not mean come feeling strong. It means freedom of speech, the right to walk in and say the plain thing without rehearsing a fine speech first. It is the word for a child who pushes open the door of his father's house without knocking, because it is his father's house. Boldness, in Hebrews, is not a feeling you work up. It is a standing you already have. You do not come to the throne of grace because the prayer feels alive this morning. You come because the door is open and the one inside is your own. And look where the grace is promised, to help in time of need. Not once you have pulled yourself together, not after you have gotten the fire back. In time of need, which is to say, now. The dry morning, the 9th year, the prayer you can barely say. But friend, you and I both know that is not usually how it falls apart. It is rarely a slammed door. It is a slow drift, and Hebrews names that too, early and gently. Lest we let them slip, not throw them away in a single rebellious afternoon. Let them slip, the way a boat with no anchor eases out from the dock so quietly that a man dozing on the deck never feels the moment the shore got smaller. That was the Caldwells. Nobody decided to stop believing. The praying just got thinner, year by year, a little further from the dock each season, until one Wednesday, a man looked up and could barely see the shore he had stood on his whole life. And the answer to a slow drift is not shame. The answer is an anchor of the soul. And here is the mercy hidden in that picture. An anchor does not take away the waves. It does not flatten the sea. It holds you steady in the middle of weather it never promised to remove. The Caldwells did not need their feelings to settle before they could be held. They needed something fixed on the far side of the storm, sunk into ground that does not move. Hebrews says that anchor reaches all the way into that within the veil, into the very place where Christ has already gone ahead of them. Which brings us, at last, to the small detail almost everybody reads right past, the one that answers the whole question. In that old way of things, the priest had a posture. He stood, day after day after day. He stood at his station and offered the same sacrifices, because the work was never finished. There was always another lamb, another morning, another year. He could never sit down, because to sit down would be to say the work was done, and it never was. Every priest stood. For centuries, they stood, because a thing that is not finished cannot rest. And then comes one of the quietest, mightiest sentences in the New Testament, and it turns on a single word. He sat down. The Greek word is ekathesin, and the form of it means an action completed and then left standing complete. He sat, and he is seated still. You do not sit down in the middle of unfinished work. You sit down when it is done. Every priest in history stood because the job was never over. Jesus sat down because his was one sacrifice for sins forever. And then he took the seat no standing priest had ever been allowed to take, at the right hand of God. Now, friend, take that small detail and lay it down on a supper table in Cullman, Alabama, beside a tired man and a name he could no longer say. If the work of getting you to God depends on your fervor, then a cold prayer is a failed prayer, and a 9th year of silence is a wasted one. But the work of getting you to God was never resting on Earl Caldwell's fervor. It was finished by a priest who sat down 2,000 years ago and has not stood back up, because there is nothing left to add. The prayer for Danny was never being carried to heaven by the heat in Earl's chest. It was being carried by the one already seated at the throne, alive forever to make intercession. The dry prayer and the burning prayer arrive in the very same hands. That is why the writer can turn to people about to walk away and say the thing he says next, and say it without pretending it is easy. Cast not away. The word there is apobalo, and it means to throw something off on purpose, to fling it aside, the way a man strips off a coat that has grown too heavy and lets it fall. Heaven could see it happening, the grip loosening, the hands opening, the slow, quiet drift toward letting go. And the warning is not, you should be ashamed of being tired. The warning is, do not throw away the very thing that is holding you. And then, in the same breath, the most honest line in the letter. Ye have need of patience. Not, this should be simple by now. Not, a mature believer would not still be struggling with this. You have need of patience, which is another way of saying, this is genuinely hard, and holding on is going to cost you something, and you are not wrong to feel the weight of it. Hebrews never once pretends the journey is small. It only insists that the one you are coming to has already finished his part, and you are not the first to walk this road, nor the only one walking it tonight. Because right after the writer lays out the long roll call of the faithful, every name from Abel down to the prophets, men and women who held on through things far harder and died still waiting, he says this: a great cloud of witnesses. And Elijah is in that number, friend. The man who sat under the juniper tree and asked to die is standing in that cloud now, and his life is testifying to a worn-out couple in Alabama. We held on through the dry stretch too, and the still small voice came, and it was worth it. You can keep going. They are not watching you from the stands to judge your form. They are testifying. We made it. So can you. The author and finisher. He starts the faith and he completes it, which means the faith Earl Caldwell was so afraid he was running out of was never his own supply to begin with. And there, at the end of the verse, the writer says it one more time, almost like he wants to be sure no tired reader misses it. Jesus is set down at the right hand of the throne of God, seated, the race already run, the pioneer already across the line, watching every straggler still on the road, knowing from the inside exactly what each step is costing, and going nowhere. So what does a man do with all of that, on a Wednesday, with the kettle gone quiet and his son still not home? What Earl and Ruth Caldwell were doing has a name. The old saints called it standing in the gap, persistent intercessory prayer, the long obedience of holding one name up to heaven for years on end. And the temptation, the thing that nearly took them under, was to believe that the worth of it rose and fell with how it felt, that a cold prayer was a counterfeit one. But Hebrews had already cut that lie off at the root. You do not pray to twist God's arm, and you do not pray to earn his ear by the heat of it. You pray the way you come to the throne of grace, with the boldness of a child who belongs in the house, resting the whole weight of it on a priest who already sat down because the work is already done. That is the answer to the question we started with, friend. Does God still hear the prayer that has gone cold? He does, not because the prayer is impressive, but because the door of grace never closed, and the one who hears it never stood back up. The hearing was never held up by your feeling. It is held up by his finished work. The Caldwells did not get a thunderclap. They got something quieter and far more durable. They kept setting the table. They kept saying the name Earl out loud again, his voice cracking on it the first night like a hinge that had not turned in years. They did not know yet what God would do about Danny. And this is not the kind of story that hands you a tidy ending, because real faith rarely gets one this side of heaven. But something had shifted inside the two of them. The drift had stopped. The anchor had caught, and a peace they had not felt in a long time settled over a small farmhouse on a red dirt road. The peace of people who had stopped measuring their prayers by the fire in them and started resting them on the one who sat down. So if you are tired tonight, genuinely tired of holding on, if what once felt alive now feels like just going through the motions, hear this before you let it slip. You do not need to feel more. You need to look at what is already true. You have a priest who was tempted in every way you are and never once turned away a worn-out believer. You have a throne of grace with the door standing open and grace promised for the time of need, which is right now. You have an anchor sunk into ground that does not move. You have a great cloud of witnesses, every one of them whispering, "Hold on, we did." And you have a Savior who sat down 2,000 years ago and has not gotten up because there is nothing left for him to finish. Take it to the Lord in prayer, friend. Even the prayer you can barely say, especially that one. Come boldly, and do not throw away your confidence. Keep setting the table. Keep saying the name. Name. He is faithful, even in the silence. Good night, friend, and God bless.